Welcome to a new monthly series of the Seatrade Maritime News Podcast, focusing on maritime and energy security in the Middle East, with Noam Raydan, Senior Research Fellow at the Washington Institute of Near East Policy. Hi, this is Marcus Hand, Editor of Seatrade Maritime News, and in this new series we are going to be delving into some of the most critical issues affecting ship owners today. Noam, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you.
Now, really sort of topical issue we're delving into today. It's been almost 6 months since the war started in the region. How has the status of navigation changed over those months in the Strait of Hormuz?
So, this is one of the most important topics nowadays out there in the market, and everybody is wondering how has the Strait of Hormuz, the nature of transit, changed over the past several months. I'm going to tell you this, and I'll explain this new navigational order. So there is a new navigational order right now in the Strait of Hormuz. And by this, I mean the following. The old routes that are considered internationally recognized and which were adopted by the International Maritime Organization in 1968, these are inbound and outbound lanes. These are not being used right now by commercial shipping. Instead, we have a completely new navigational order, and this is what Iran right now wants to shape according to its own terms. So in this new navigational order, which we are seeing emerging in the region, we have completely new lanes that are being used by commercial shipping. And as I said earlier, the internationally recognized lanes, which we are familiar with, and these are in the center of the strait. These are not used anymore. And this is why I'm calling it a new navigational order in the strait. Now, in light of this new navigational order, of course, we are seeing completely new ways of trading. And we will get to these in a bit, but I mean that countries, regional oil and gas producer and exporters are trying to find new methods to keep their energy flows ongoing amid Iranian threats and attacks against shipping.
Now, you talked about those new lanes there. From observations from the data about that traffic, what does that tell us about how the traffic is moving now?
Right. So if you want, imagine the following. We had two inbound and outbound lanes in the center of the strait. Right now, we have a corridor, lanes that go around Oman. Ships are using this lane, and it is described as a U.S. protected lane to leave and enter the region. And then we have an inbound and outbound lanes that are controlled by Iran. Commercial shipping are using these available lanes, but what Iran is trying to do right now is show that ships that decide to take the Omani corridor will come under attacks. And this is why we are seeing Iran still carrying attacks against different types of commercial ships that are taking the Omani route, because Iran wants ships to use lanes that are controlled by Tehran. Why? Because Iran wants to show that it is the one or the power that decides how transit is managed in the strait. And this is why they are trying to come up with a new management to govern the Strait of Hormuz. And this is what we are seeing right now with respect to the talks that are taking place between Tehran and Muscat.
If you're enjoying the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on the app of your choice. Now, you mentioned the attacks there in the Omani lane. How is Iran continuing to sort of threaten shipping and keep up that high risk of using the Omani corridor?
So with respect to Iran, and since the beginning of the war, we've seen them using different methods and even weapons in order to target commercial shipping. Based on the available data, based on the available information from independent maritime security authorities, they are using drones, UAVs. They used to also use the marine radio channel in order to threaten seafarers, meaning warning seafarers not to transit, let's say, on the Omani corridor, or to reroute and go back inside to the Persian Gulf, or not to transit at all into the region. So as I said, drone hailing, And we've seen them recently attacking a number of commercial ships, including those that are affiliated with ADNOC, which is the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. We've seen tankers and even non-tankers affiliated with ADNOC coming under attack, and also, of course, other non-UAE, affiliated ships. So this is how Iran right now is maintaining the high risks on the Omani corridor. Again, they want to show that this corridor is a high risk lane for shipping, and that way they can try to redirect vessels to the Iran controlled lanes.
Okay, so now if we kind of look at that situation, what trends have emerged in the Straits after the Iran-US MOU that collapsed in July and the attacks have resumed between the two sides?
This is a very good question because, as I've recently written, when an old maritime arrangement collapses, like the old navigational order we had in the region, you're going to definitely see a new arrangement or order emerging. And by this, I mean new ways of trading. And for this reason, we are seeing the shuttle services that are happening in the region. What does that mean? It means that some tankers would load inside the Persian Gulf. Let's say they load from the United Arab Emirates, and then they transit the Omani corridor and then transfer this cargo to another tanker that is waiting in the Gulf of Oman. And this tanker that is waiting in the Gulf of Oman is not transiting the strait because of the high risks. So now we have tankers that are willing actually to load within the Gulf region and then shuttle or those cargoes outside to the Gulf of Oman, transfer them to other vessels. And we're not only talking about oil here. This also seems, and based on available data, is also involving liquefied natural gas. So this is what we are seeing, in addition to the existing pipelines, which some countries like the United Arab Emirates as well as Saudi Arabia have been using. We have Saudi Arabia has a pipeline that runs from the east to the west to the Red Sea, and from there they have been rerouting some volumes that have been disrupted because of the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. And we have the United Arab Emirates. They have also a pipeline that runs from onshore fields to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, and from there tankers load and go to global markets.
Just, you talked about the shuttle tankers there. Does that sort of become like a specific target for Iran?
Yes, because if we take a look at the most recent attacks, we will notice that those vessels that were attacked recently by Iran were affiliated with ADNOC. Again, ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. And these include the bulk carrier also that was targeted on Friday, August 14, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, right now, at least me and probably other observers and trackers in the market we're keeping our eyes on the vessels that are affiliated with the UAE, because again, Iran wants to send a message that even if some regional oil and gas producers and exporters are trying to find alternative routes, Iran will not make it an easy mission for them. And we're seeing this in how Iran is behaving on the maritime domain in the Strait of Hormuz.
It's really interesting how that's sort of emerging and your observations on that. We've had the much reported talks between Oman and Iran over management of the strait. Do these talks really mean anything?
That's also a good question, Marcus, because a lot of people are wondering what's going on with those talks and whether they will lead to any results. Here's the thing. Iran sees that the Strait of Hormuz needs to be governed by the coastal states. And that means Iran and Oman, right? However, Iran wants to ensure that it is in control of any future arrangement. Iran has made it very clear they will not accept any regional arrangement for the Strait of Hormuz in which they do not play a central role. And this is why we saw Iran recently rejecting a proposal that reportedly received the consent of some regional Gulf states. And it was, again, reportedly modeled kind of on the cooperative mechanism for the Straits of Malacca and Singapore. So again, what Iran right now is doing, holding talks with Oman. But as I said earlier, they want to ensure that any future governance in the Strait of Hormuz will have Iran as a key decision maker. And this means that Iran, and according to what they have been saying, the officials, Iranian officials, want to remain in control of inbound transit and even have a say on the ships that exit the region. So this is where we are. We are still seeing that Oman and Iran are holding talks, but there aren't yet clear signs that we are about to see any breakthrough in those talks.
So that's a little way off, and Iran is very much maintaining that, that it wants that control and the literal states to have that control. And now, if we look sort of a little bit more historically, Iran has used the maritime domain as a theatre of operations long before the current war, seizing vessels and similar types of things. What are the signs that Tehran now wants to maintain this influence over the Strait even when the war comes to the end?
My answer to this question is related also to what I said earlier. But here I really want to highlight something, Marcus. Over the past several years, Iran has used the maritime domain as a theater of operations, right? This is not the first time we see Iran going after commercial vessels. In the past, if we take a look at 2019, 2020, up to even 2023 and 2024, we did see Iran retaliating against its adversaries, namely Israel and the United States, by attacking some ships in the region that are linked to these two countries. Also, with respect to the United States, we did see Iran retaliating against Washington in the past because of US sanctions. And with respect to Israel, also we saw Iran going after some Israel affiliated vessels in the region as part of what we called back then the Iran Israel shadow war. My point here is that Iran has been using again the maritime domain as a domain where it can retaliate against other countries for some time. And they've evolved throughout the past years. What we're seeing right now amid this current conflict are completely different circumstances, meaning Iran is not just attacking one or two ships. No, they are trying to enforce a new navigational order and consistently threatening and attacking ships. Because right now they are trying to use this wartime disruption throughout the Iran war since March 2026 in order to have a lasting advantage. And this lasting advantage, they want to achieve it through those talks with Oman over the future governance of the Strait of Hormuz. I myself, I do not see the Strait of Hormuz returning back to the traditional traffic separation scheme that was adopted by the International Maritime Organization. Definitely, this should happen, return back to how it was, and keep any arrangement in line with the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea. But unfortunately, based on Iran's behavior right now, it seems they will not make it a very easy mission to return to how things were.
Okay, so if we take your view that it won't return to that sort of previous order, and you mentioned pipelines before as well, going across UAE and similar, there is a sort of argument that regional countries will eventually sort of find a way to avoid the strait via those pipelines. Is there data to back that up?
So here's what's happening. We have countries like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia that have existing pipelines, and they've been able to utilize them amid the Iran war in order to reroute oil volumes that were exiting via the Strait of Hormuz, reroute them and use those pipelines to export them in different ways. And then we have countries like Iraq, which heavily relies on the Strait of Hormuz. Iraq, and prior to the Iran war, was exporting over 3 million barrels per day of Basra crude, and all this relied on the Strait of Hormuz, and the key market for Iraq has been Asia. Now, in the case of Iraq, Iraq has different pipeline projects. And the reason why I want to focus here on Iraq is just to show that it is easy to talk about pipelines, but when it comes to implementing them, they're going to face several barriers. Iraq, over the past years, also discussed some pipeline projects, including one that would extend from Basra in southern Iraq up to Aqaba in Jordan on the Red Sea. This pipeline has been part of some plans in Iraq for decades, but Iraq has never been able to implement it due to several political reasons, security, and other factors. Now, Iraq also wants to build a pipeline to Syria, to Benyas. Why? Because Iraq also is trying now to think of ways to export crude volumes from Iraq to the Mediterranean in Syria from the Benyas port, and export it from there to global markets. Now, it's easy again to talk about these pipelines, but if we take a look at Iraq and review its history and review how things work within Iraq, we will realize that there are issues related to bureaucracy, corruption, security, government changes, regular government changes that always take projects back to the drawing boards. And all these barriers, we need to take them into consideration when we think about how pipelines can really be built in Iraq. When it comes also to the issue of financing these giant projects, Iraq is in no position to finance these projects on its own. And this is why Iraq is trying to attract investments from foreign companies, including from US firms, in order to invest in these pipelines. But for now, my assessment is that Iraq will continue relying heavily on the Strait of Hormuz to get its oil out to global markets. Now, let me also mention that Iraq is also using trucks to truck fuel oil, high sulfur fuel oil from Iraq to Syria. And they have been able to truck volumes on several trucks. This is a very challenging method. And here I mean the logistics of this way of moving the oil. It's very challenging to move the oil on trucks to Syria. It would require many trucks to do that. So Iraq is trucking those volumes, but again, it is not a sustainable solution. And this is why resuming the two-way tanker traffic via the Strait of Hormuz is really what will help us resolve this crisis in the Strait with respect to the energy flows.
Now, given that that's not a sustainable solution, does this mean Iran is aware regional countries and global energy markets will continue to rely on the Strait of Hormuz for energy exports and imports, and that's why it wants to control the Strait and have this leverage?
Absolutely. Because as I said, even if some countries, like the United Arab Emirates, also has plans to start a pipeline. They've said that they have plans for a pipeline that might become operational by 2027, next year. Even if that happens, again, the Strait of Hormuz will remain key to the energy flows out of the region, oil and gas, in addition to non-energy flows, right? Because we need to think about bulk carriers, container ships, so other non-tankers that use the strait. In the case of Iraq, as I've just said, the Strait of Hormuz is key for Baghdad, because it doesn't have right now any effective pipeline system to just move the crude oil, for instance, from southern Iraq and export it via the Mediterranean by sending it via pipeline to Syria or even through Turkey. So, because Iraq does have a pipeline that runs to Turkey's Ceyhan port on the Mediterranean. But again, this pipeline cannot carry the volumes that Iraq exports from the south. It has a limited capacity so far. So the reason why I'm giving again this overview is just to show that yes, Iran is aware of the significance of this critical waterway for regional countries. And it is clear that we will not find complete alternatives for this waterway overnight. It's going to be a very long journey. And let's also keep in mind the following: even pipelines can be attacked. And we need to take a look at Iraq, for instance, to see how some militias in the country are targeting infrastructure. In Iraq, for instance, we have Iran-aligned Iraqi armed groups that have been targeting some energy infrastructure in Kurdistan in northern Iraq, forcing oil fields, for instance, to shut down or curtail production. So this is one with respect to pipelines, meaning that pipelines will not eliminate the threats. Also, something to bear in mind is the following: Iran can even target vessels that are loading in the Gulf of Oman. Iran also showed over the past years that they can target tankers even in the Arabian Sea. So we need to remember that we can find alternatives, but they will not eliminate the threat. Iran still has drones and different ways to target energy infrastructure in the region.
So this is going to carry on for some significant length of time. There's no quick solution here. Now, I just want to come to sort of like a more human side with the shipping industry that's related to this. And that's we've seen hundreds of ships still and thousands of seafarers still sort of stranded within the Gulf region. And the IMO had an evacuation plan, which it started briefly and it's not been able to resume. This can't go on forever. What are some of the temporary measures that might be taken until a deal can be reached over the future governance of the strait?
Thank you for mentioning the seafarers. So the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, had a large-scale evacuation plan. And after the memorandum of understanding was reached between Iran and the United States back in around June the 17th, we did see this plan executed. But then the IMO had to pause it because of Iran's attacks. So I'm just giving this background, especially for listeners who are not familiar with this IMO plan. So this means that we still have thousands of seafarers stranded in the Persian Gulf, hundreds of ships still there, unable to leave. This is why I believe that the priority should be to find a way, not a final resolution to the governance of the Strait of Hormuz, but at least an initial plan to help those seafarers leave that region, given that they've been there for a very long time, get those ships out, resume at least a temporary inbound and outbound transit, again, for a specific period. And once that's accomplished, then serious or more deep talks can be held with respect to a future arrangement for the Strait of Hormuz. This is what I believe would be a good plan because, as I mentioned, and as you mentioned, Marcus, you have many humans that have been stranded in that region for a very long time. And the priority right now needs to focus on evacuating them. This means that we need to go back to the IMO large-scale evacuation plan because this can also help solve this problem step by step until, again, we find a final resolution for the issue of the future governance of the Strait of Hormuz.
Let's hope for the sake of those seafarers that does actually happen and we do get some kind of interim solution. Now, just to wrap this up, we look forward. What are some of the challenges that people may be underestimating in everything that's going on here?
I believe it would be Iran's behavior itself, meaning I myself don't see them easing their threats or their attacks, meaning they're willing to drag this for a longer time. And this is what worries me, meaning that Iran, and despite, for instance, the US naval blockade, right, will not give up easily. And they will continue to increase their attacks, increase their threats to shipping, and show that they are unwilling at all to help resolve this issue this year. And they're willing to keep it ongoing for a longer time. This is what worries me because of the impact it will have, again, on regional countries, key oil and gas producers. And I want to note that countries like Iraq, for instance, Iraq heavily relies on oil exports for revenues. 90% of Iraq's budget comes from oil exports. That's a big number, over 90%, excuse me. And again, we need to bear in mind the impact of such an Iranian behavior on the global energy markets if it continues for a longer period of time.
Okay, so we should prepare ourselves potentially for something that's going to go on for some time. Noam, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to our listeners today.
Thank you very much, Marcus.
And look forward to joining you again on the Seatrade Maritime News Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, and we look forward to joining you on our next episode.